On today's episode, we sit down with Ben Sanderson, the director of player development at my alma mater and Danny's alma mater, NC State. And what was really interesting to me is he's an East Carolina born athlete, and he had a lot of great insights to Keith LeClair and the legend in the program that he built at East Carolina, which was really, really informative and something that I had no idea about.
Yeah, and I think he shares a lot that we hope to strive for in terms of, I think he's a lifelong learner. He's constantly trying to grow, and he's worn a lot of different hats as a baseball developer, instructor at the youth level, collegiate level, and even the pros. And I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, certainly something you're not going to want to miss. Cue the music.
Welcome to Controlling the Zone podcast, Ep.4, with your host Danny Healy and Kyle Wilson. What's going on, Kato?
Not much, man. Excited to record with this guest today. Obviously, he's a part of our alma mater, and I know you and I both feel very, very strongly about NC State and the program that they've grown and the coaches that are associated with it. So we can't wait to dive a little bit deeper in talking with Ben.
Oh, yeah. All about the Pac-9 today. So today's guest, Ben Sanderson, grew up in Seven Springs, North Carolina, and played his college ball at ECU. After receiving a bachelor's degree in exercise and sports science, he joined the ECU staff as a grad assistant. From there, he worked as the operations manager at Triple Crown Training Center in Greenville, North Carolina. And then Ben moved on to a paid assistant job at FAU, where he assisted with outfielders hitting and assisted in recruiting efforts. Then Ben returned to ECU for a second stint as an assistant coach, and then moved on to an area scout job for the Mariners in the North Carolina region, and then was hired by NC State as the director of player and program development in 2017, and he just finished up his abbreviated the third year at NC State in that role. So thanks for coming on today, Ben.
Thanks for having me, guys.
We're pumped to talk to you. We're always looking to talk to NC State guys. So I'm curious, growing up in North Carolina, Seven Springs, not an area I'm too familiar with, but did you grow up with strong ties to ECU, NC State, UNC, or you were kind of unbiased?
No, you guys don't get me in trouble with the Wolfpack Nation here. But I did. Yeah, I grew up with strong ties to East Carolina. Both my parents graduated from ECU. And I think that when you grow up in Eastern North Carolina, you grow up in a rural area like Seven Springs, it's, you're almost bound to ECU. That's who everyone pulls for in that part of the state. But I think there's a lot of similarities between ECU and NC State that maybe both fan bases and both alumni bases that they don't realize. But I did grow up a Pirate fan and grew up going to football games. At Old Ficklin Stadium when it was just two sides and it wasn't. There was no press box. There was no end zone enclosures. There was no upper deck. And can still remember going to those football games with my dad, and also baseball games back in the day with Coach Overton. It was so I got a deep history with ECU.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that because I think there was a different kind of mutual respect between ECU and NC State. It's like, you know what, you guys go hard in the paint. You're not too fancy, not too pretty. It's just kind of that blue collar kind of hard nosed mindset. And I always loved the matchup with ECU. So I feel like it's one of those things that the fan bases kind of see a little bit more eye to eye than us in Carolina did. But it was always an awesome, awesome experience. And they would tend to pack out our stadium some days with their fans a little more than ours because they'd bring busloads of people, and I thought that was awesome. But so growing up in Seven Springs, I assumed, did you play multiple sports or were you just baseball through and through from a young age?
Yeah, I played all three all the way up until middle school. In middle school, I was actually in the front yard playing football with my older brother, and it was a rainy day like today in Raleigh, and I tripped and fell, and he landed on top of me. And it had fractured a vertebrae in my back. So at that point, I had to stop playing football. Went to the orthopedic surgeon, and they ruled out surgery, but they said I was going to stop playing football. So that was the end of my football playing career. I played middle school basketball and baseball, of course. But as I got into high school, I concentrated primarily on baseball, and basketball and football were kind of in the past.
So it had to be the dream, right? You grow up an ECU fan. Can you kind of take us through the recruiting process? Were you a later recruit? Who did it kind of come down to in the last minute?
Yeah, the only schools that really recruited me before East Carolina were Barton, a school in Wilson, I'm sure you guys are familiar with,
Mm-hmm.
and Campbell University in Bowie's Creek. And Randy Hood was the assistant coach at Campbell at the time, and we had a tie together. We both grew up in Wayne County. He played at Southern Wayne. I played at Eastern Wayne. We both played for Wayne County Post 11. So there was a relationship in place there. But those were really the only two other schools that recruited me coming out of high school. And recruiting was different back then. It wasn't the early recruiting that you see now where you're committing as a freshman or a sophomore. That stuff was unheard of back in those days. So I was still open and didn't know where I was going all the way into the summer following my senior year in American Legion baseball. And we played Pitt County, their American Legion post, in an early summer game, and they played their home games at the time at Harrington Field in Greenville, the old East Carolina baseball home stadium. And I actually hit a home run that day, and Coach LeClair, who was the head coach, had just gotten the head coaching job. He just finished up, I think, his first year. He was at the game. Yeah. He's awesome. And he saw me hit the home run and came up to me after the game, and things kind of took off from there. And that's where I always wanted to go. I always wanted to be a Pirate. I grew up a Pirate, so it was kind of a dream come true that I had the opportunity to play there and to play for him.
Yeah, I mean, that's awesome getting to go to your dream school. I think a lot of kids sometimes could end up making the wrong decision chasing that dream school, but it obviously worked out really well for you. So what was it like getting to play at your dream school? What were your 4 years playing at ECU like?
Well, the thing you remember is the wins and the great teams that we had. I was there for 5 years, 1 year as a red shirt, and then 4 years playing. And we went to regionals all 5 of those seasons. And we went to one super regional during that time as well. So you remember the good teams. You remember the regionals. I remember the super regional in Kinston against Tennessee like it was yesterday. And those are the things that stand out. The teammates that you played with that have moved on to good things and great things in baseball now. And the times in the weight room and all the old facilities we had at East Carolina. Those are the things you remember. Those are the things that stand out.
Oh, yeah. It's definitely the memories of it's funny. I remember after certain wins, just whose apartment we were in, what we were talking about after that game. And that's stuff that you never really forget. But you ended up receiving your degree in exercise and sports science from ECU in 2003. And then you received your master's a few years later, but you were brought in as a grad assistant at ECU, it seems like right away, right after you finished or ran at eligibility, I guess.
Yeah, I actually spent some time at Triple Crown Training Center while I was going to grad school in the mid-2000s. And then after that is when I took the volunteer job at East Carolina. So got done in 2003, 2004, 2005, and 2006, I was working at Triple Crown, finishing up my master's degree in sport management. And then 2007 was my first year in coaching as a volunteer assistant at ECU.
Nice. So I think one of the things that was really cool, and I'm sure it's a big source of pride for you. So you were the first honorary recipient of wearing the number 23, worn prior by Keith LeClair. So first, basically an award that was kind of invented, but it's kind of representing all the things that you would want as a Pirate to represent. So how cool of an honor was that and was that voted on by the players, by the coach? How was that decided? Who was going to wear that?
It was absolutely the honor of my lifetime. To be able to represent, what Coach LeClair meant to college baseball, what he meant to East Carolina and to our program, to our team, to the community in Eastern North Carolina, and the success that he achieved over a very short amount of time at ECU was unprecedented. And to be able to put that number on my back and wear that jersey that year and represent that was certainly one of the neatest things that has ever, happened in my lifetime. And, the coolest thing about it was, he actually asked me to wear the jersey. when he was still with us before he passed away. And he was there the day that I received the jersey when we had the ceremony to, and Coach Randy Mazey awarded me the jersey. He was there in the room. So those are the things you remember. Those are the coolest parts about it. And I'm glad I got to share that with him. He had ALS and it passed away in 2005. So I'm so glad that I was able to share that with him, before he passed away.
Absolutely, and I've listened to Cliff Godwin, the talk about LeClair, and I've listened to a lot of, just being in the state of North Carolina, a lot of coaches and former players talk about what Keith LeClair meant to them as players and as they moved on in the coaching community. Can you dive in a little bit about what exactly Keith LeClair meant to you, and then more importantly, what he meant to not only just the baseball community, but the baseball community there in East Carolina?
Yeah, the Coach LeClair's true talent as a coach, what was his ability to motivate. He was such a tremendous motivator, and you'll find coaches out there that know just as much about the game, about the ins and outs, the first and third defenses, the bunt defenses, the calling an offense and managing a pitching staff. But he is the best motivator that I've ever spent time with. You could have a 5-minute conversation with Coach LeClair, and you would want to run away from that conversation and get started on whatever he had explained that you needed to do to get better and to develop as a baseball player. We actually, after my second year at ECU, this was my redshirt freshman year, I was injured the entire year. I had a hamate surgery and I had a broken foot and had to have that operated on. And he actually, towards the end of that year, had a back surgery. And so both of us were kind of laid up and kind of on the shelf. And I was having my exit meeting for the year, and we had it at his house. And we sat on his front porch and talked. And, he talked. And at this point, guys, I did not have the ability to play at ECU. I was 2 years in. It was obvious that I was not going to be a factor there. But he took the next 30 to 45 minutes after back surgery at his home, and he explained exactly how I was going to become a player at ECU, what the process was going to be, and what I needed to do to achieve my goals to play at ECU. And I was on crutches, but I wanted to run off of that porch and get started on what he told me right there. It was such a clear path, and he was so good at motivating you to do those things. That was his talent, and that's what I remember the most. And that's some things that I've tried to use, in my own career.
Yeah, we Danny and I talked about in our first episode about communication and how to communicate with players, and it's really cool to see. There's a lot of movement now in the game about individuality and trust and connecting with players, and the ability to do that is so crucial to success of the program. So there's no secret why he was able to be such a dominating force and create some really, really good teams. And it's really just comes down to not about what but it's about, who and how you connect with your players to motivate them, for sure.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and we played for a guy who was a pretty good motivator, Coach Aiden at State. And it's funny, you can always get better at learning some of the intricacies of player development and coaching the game and stuff like that. But I don't know that I ever played for a guy who made me feel like the people in the other dugout were my enemies better than Coach Avent. And it's just that brotherhood that he created and the inspirational part, whether it's out of being pissed off or just we're hot at the time, whatever the case may be, he just knew the right buttons to push. But so you had the grad assistant job. Were you working at Triple Crown Training Center while you were getting your master's degree?
I was, yeah. During the time I was getting my master's from ECU, I was working part-time at Triple Crown Training Center. It was almost close to full-time, but, I was able to work it out during the days where most of my classes were in the morning for my master's. And then I had a little bit of a buffer between lunch and when we got things going at Triple Crown in the afternoon, where if I needed any homework or any studying, any schoolwork that I needed to do, I would have that little buffer before we got started. And we normally got started about 3 o'clock at Triple Crown every day and went up to about 9 o'clock at night. As I'm sure you guys are very familiar with that schedule and running the facility.
100%. So obviously the facility life and doing individual lessons with anyone from 5 to, I always say 5 to 25 years old, you get a broad spectrum of talent, and you have to be able to communicate with, the different age groups. And I think that teaches a lot about coaching and how to simplify your process. But I'm curious, what are some of the things that you took away from, running that facility, being in charge of instruction, and some of the things that you learned through the instruction process that allowed you to move the next step in your career, which we'll get into in a minute. But curious about your experience in the private sector training facility world.
Well, I think you learn a foundation of who you want to be as a coach and what you want to teach and how you want to get your message across to players, how you want players to view your personality. And you get to do it at a little bit of a slower pace than what you see at the Division I level. At Division I level, we're going 1,000 miles a minute, man. We're going full go all the time. And at a facility, you have a chance to literally, kind of slow things down a little bit and develop your coaching personality.
So go ahead.
No, you got to go ahead.
So you talk about, really developing your philosophy and understanding why you're doing it. And one of the things that we ask all of our coaches, and it's something that I ask even coaches that aren't coming on the podcast that I just have conversations with in just regular talks, is what is their why? Why are you doing what you're doing? Because we all know we don't get in this game to become millionaires and to become super rich. We have a passion for something that draws us back to the game. So you as a player, you as a coach, what is your why in coaching?
I think you have to make the most of every single day. And I think you have to make the very most of what all of us have been blessed with different abilities. I think you have to find your ability as an individual and as a player. And I think you have to grow that ability as much as you possibly can. For me, it was always the way I played the game. I couldn't hit like Chad Tracy. I couldn't defend like Nick Schnabel. But I played the game extremely hard, and I think that had an impact on my teammates. And so I think that was what I focused on as a player, is trying to motivate those guys or motivate my teammates with how hard I played. And I think as a coach, you just try to find the best ways to motivate each individual and find out what lights their fire and what gets them going, and you key on that.
No doubt. I think working in the private sector, like Kyle said, in a facility like Triple Crown Training Center, and like we have a TPA, it's just you have the opportunity to wear a lot of different hats. It's funny, I was delivering organic produce and coaching on the side at TPA to start. I was like, Kyle, get me out of this hellhole, please. And I ended up working the front desk here, and I'd run some strength classes and speed classes. And I saw that you did some speed and agility and strength stuff. So do you think that helped you become just, I guess, a more versatile overall athlete developer with all the hats you wore? And could you kind of get into all the different jobs that you did at Triple Crown Sports?
It was a lot. Usually my day would start out doing about an hour of private hitting instruction. And then I would transition into my strength and conditioning groups. I normally had 4 to 5 groups of about 10 to 15 kids, and we would do speed, agility work. And then we would go upstairs and do some resistance training and some strength training. And then the night would normally finish up with some janitorial responsibilities. There was some trash that needed to be taken out. There was some cleaning and
cleaning toilets. We love it.
Yeah. So that was all part of it. So, but yeah, I think being able to teach and lead kids in those strength and conditioning groups taught me a lot about that side of development. I felt like I had a pretty good handle on the baseball side, especially from a hitting standpoint and an outfield, infield standpoint. But teaching kids and trying to keep them healthy and safe, and also developing their speed and their strength, I felt like that helped me, develop a side of my coaching that I would need, later on that I wouldn't have had otherwise.
Absolutely. So take us through, obviously you're at the training center, take us through the conversation and how it was presented to you to come on and work at ECU. And I know you alluded to it a little bit earlier about, it's such an honor to be able to put on your uniform again at your alma mater and give back to the, the players that were coming into that university that you had just short amount of time away from. So you're probably pretty close in age with a lot of those players. But take us through how that was presented to you and the conversation that was had to bring you on at ECU.
Yeah, it was actually at Coach LeClair's celebration of life. at Clark LeClair. So it's now Clark LeClair Stadium. And we were having the service, and a lot of his former players and former coaches were speaking to the crowd, after he had passed away. And Billy Godwin, who had taken over for Randy Mazey the year before Coach LeClair passed away, he came up to me during that service and said, I had heard that you might be interested in coaching. We've got an opening on our staff. Would you like to come on? And I thought that was a little bit of a sign. To be honest, I thought it was a little bit of a message, how it came during that service, that, this is a great opportunity. And maybe somebody, might have been pushing me that way, that it wasn't with us anymore. And so I jumped at the opportunity. I came on as director of operations. And very soon after that, Clayton McCullough, who's actually now the field coordinator in the Los Angeles Dodgers player.
Yeah.
Yep. He moved on to professional baseball and a coaching career, which has ended up really, really well for him. And so I slid into that volunteer position in the summer of 2006. And I was there, until I left for FAU.
Well, it's crazy because me and Kyle, in our time at State, we had Brian Ward is our volunteer assistant. And it blows my mind knowing a little bit more about the behind-the-scenes stuff, about the tasks that a volunteer assistant is given and the hours that they work and the compensation that they get for it. I mean, Coach Ward was just as pivotal a piece of our coaching staff as anybody else. The guy knows the game front and back, and I'm sure you felt the same way at ECU with all the hours you put in. I'm sure the human side of you felt this at times, but did you ever get frustrated by the compensation compared to the hours and effort that you were putting in the volunteer job?
Guys, I was actually really fortunate that I had a great situation as a volunteer. My parents lived 30, 45 minutes away from East Carolina. So I got a lot of home cooked meals during that time. My mom took really good care of me. My parents were really close. So I know not all volunteers have that type of situation. So I feel very fortunate that my 2 years were spent close to home and they were able to help out some. But yeah, it's tough. It's tough. You're putting in, I think when people are getting into coaching and young coaches are starting out, they don't realize that a volunteer assistant, that is a full-time assistant job. You just don't get paid. And you do it for the experience, and you do it because it's a springboard into what your future is going to be. And you make it work. You make it work any way you can. You work camps, you run camps, and you make a little money off of that, and you do some lessons, and you do whatever you can to get by and scrape by until you get that first paid assistant job, and then you can go from there.
Yeah, and it seems like ECU has a pretty cool setup with I don't know if it's the same complex that just changed names, but Next Level. Seems like I know a lot of coaches that work at Pitt and stuff like that they're able to kind of supplement some money working there, but yeah, it's definitely tough to make things work, but it is awesome that you were able to go get your home cooked meals, maybe do some laundry, stuff like that. But then you moved down to my neck of the woods in Boca Raton, FAU, which a lot of people may not know that program all that well, but it's competitive baseball. It's a good program. I played with some guys that played there. How excited were you to get that opportunity to move down there? And it's a totally different world in South Florida compared to North Carolina. So were you a little bit hesitant, or were you just ready to jump all in wherever you got the best opportunity?
I was ready. I was ready for an opportunity. I think that was the toughest thing, for me, and being a volunteer. My financial situation was good, but I was so ready to get out and start recruiting and evaluating. And that was, not being able to do that as a volunteer assistant in East Carolina was frustrating, and I had to slow myself down a little bit. So the opportunity to go to Florida Atlantic was the opportunity to recruit and get out and start evaluating and start to build my background and my experience there. But you're right. You talk about culture shock. It's one thing to go from Raleigh-Durham to South Florida, but when you're going from rural Eastern North Carolina your entire life to Boca Raton, Florida, it is culture shock times 10. I mean, when you're driving down, and I remember the first time driving down, basically when you get to Jupiter, it's one big city all the way to Homestead. It's nothing but city all the way down. And I remember driving down thinking, where's the country?
Where are the trees?
Like, where are the farms and everything down here? When am I going to get to the place? And there are none. And so the vegetation's different. The homes are different. The stucco, the tile roofs, it's just all completely different than what I grew up around. So it took some time to get used to it down there. And there was some culture shock that first year, but I worked for such a great guy in John McCormack. This is one of the best guys in college baseball. I think anyone would second that. And he made my transition a lot easier. We had such a great staff at FAU with Jason Jackson, who's now at University of Alabama as their pitching coach, and Brad Fritt, who's the head baseball coach at Florida State College of Jacksonville. That made my transition so much easier, is working with such a great group and having a guy like Coach Mack that had been in South Florida his entire life and kind of knew how to transition and how to get used to it.
Yeah, it's funny. It was like the total opposite experience for me when I came on my recruiting visit to North Carolina. I was like, where are the buildings? I just remember when the plane was getting ready to land, and I was like, I have never seen this many trees before. Because, I mean, in South Florida, it's just there's not a square inch of real estate not built up. And maybe you're going to see some palm trees, but it's just a totally different world. But I think that's awesome that you were given that opportunity. You were put around a great staff and a great area, I guess, to draw kids into. I mean, Boca Raton you got beautiful weather. It's a baseball hotbed down there. But you're given recruiting responsibilities for the first time in as tough of a neighborhood to lock in-state talent as you could possibly be in. So you're fighting over the same recruits as Miami, FSU, UF, UCF, who was on the rise. Coach Godwin was there for a while. USF, FIU. How difficult was it did you have an approach where you were looking more for diamonds in the rough out of state, guys in state? How hard was it to recruit with all those big dogs in the same neighborhood?
Yeah, it's the who's who of college baseball. I mean, you're talking about University of Miami, that is 45 miles down the interstate, that's won multiple national championships and is a fixture of college baseball. Florida State with Coach Martin at the time was the exact same. University of Florida was on the rise under Coach O'Sullivan. UCF was very strong in those days. It's very, very difficult. And going head to head against those guys at Florida Atlantic and against those schools, you're not going to win many of those battles. You have to either get to a kid ahead of those guys, or you have to wait out the process for those schools to kind of pass and they come back to you. But we just worked, we got after it. Jason and I, Coach Mack's assistants, we were both single at the time. So we would get to work at 7 a.m. and we would leave at 7:30 at night. We would text and talk about players and conversations that we were having on the phone the rest of the night. And we just lived to recruit. We lived to try to make that program, what it is and what it was. And we worked. If you just work in the state of Florida recruiting, if you just get out and you just work, you can find players. You're going to find players because there's so many down there. People asked me when I came back to ECU after FAU what's the difference? What's the difference between recruiting in Florida and recruiting in the Carolinas? And, I would tell this story. You could be in South Florida. You could be on your way home in the spring on a Thursday night, on your way home before a weekend series and see the lights on at a local high school. I'm going to stop in and go and watch a kid and he's 86, 89. The guy pitching is 86, 89 with a good breaking ball. And you're like, man, I just stumbled in and there's nobody at the game. It's just you. And we just stumbled into a guy that we can offer. And if you go to that same game in the Carolinas, then you walk into the game and it's South Carolina, it's North Carolina, it's East Carolina, it's NC State, it's Clemson, it's the who's who. And so there's just so many players in such a big area down in Florida that if you just work, you could find the right types of guys.
Yeah, and I think even just when I played in East Coast Pro, I was in Cooper City, which is about 45 minutes south of Boca, and it was funny. They had like the Midwest region team and all these other regions with several states, and then it was Central Florida to Puerto Rico, and it's like, and certain big league teams had more than one area scout just for South Florida, so it's definitely dense talent-wise, and it is funny. Hearing what you said about those high school games, it kind of makes sense for your style now, because I think it's really cool that a lot of times in the past, just based off my experiences, I'm like, don't expect to see those home name college programs at your high school games, but I've seen you at several high school games out there. So do you think that time at FAU kind of led you to just be more willing to, you know what, I'm going to stop by the Broughton game or see what Garner's got right now? Do you think that kind of played into it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you learn to work, you learn to grind in a different way when you work in a program like FAU, and you kind of learn that you have to go the extra mile to maybe see a player or recruit a player that you wouldn't necessarily have to do it at a bigger program. So I'm glad that I built my foundation, with those guys down there where you really had to get after it to find players. And it's helped me out a lot later in my career.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious, as a junior product or junior college product myself, I had to, growing up in the Chicagoland area, had to move down south to Texas to play junior college baseball, and I was pleasantly surprised at the talent and the competition that we had. But curious from a recruiting standpoint, how often you sought out those junior college products, and how valuable was it to create relationships with those junior college coaches? Because we all know junior college baseball, especially at that time in Florida, is second to none. And a lot of those junior college teams would compete very, very well against some pretty good Division I teams.
No question. And recruiting is 100% about relationships and the relationships that you have in place. And we were very fortunate at Florida Atlantic that John McCormack had been the recruiting coordinator at FAU before he got the head coaching job for 20 years. And so he had a lifetime of relationships built that Jason and I were able to work off of and get started off of. And a lot of those were with the junior college programs in the state. Palm Beach State was 25 minutes north of us. Broward and Miami-Dade were, 45 minutes to an hour, depending on traffic, to our south. And there was tremendous junior college programs everywhere in the state. And, we could hit the ground running with those programs, not only with the relationships that Jason and I were able to build, but the relationships that were already in place from Coach McCormack's time as a recruiting coordinator. But yeah, we did a lot with junior colleges. And I remember some really good players. Andy Mee is a guy that stands out that came from Santa Fe up in the Gainesville area. And he really kind of turned around, the program and during my time there. 2009, we didn't have a great year. And then Andy came on board in 2010 and really changed our fortunes around. And Dan Scheffler was a guy that I remember from Palm Beach State that was such a tremendous player, such tremendous power. It hit the middle of our order for 2 years. Raymond Church from Palm Beach, Alex Hudak from Seminole up near Orlando. I could go on and on and on about the guys that, we would do what we could with the high school kids. We would do everything that we could to get the high school kids we wanted. And then the guys we didn't get, that Florida got, that Miami got, that Florida State and UCF, then we would fill those holes with junior college guys. And it ended up working really well for us.
Yeah, just at NC State, I mean, Ray Cotilla, we got from Miami-Dade, Ryan Matthews from Santa Fe, Brian Adamitz, I think, was Palm Beach State. And it seems like now when I look at JUCO rankings on Perfect Game and stuff like that, it's JUCOs that I haven't even heard of in South Florida that are kind of dominating right now. So if you looked at some of those Miami-Dade teams back in the heyday, I mean, it looked like the Cuban national team. I mean, they looked like grown men, 24 to 25 years old, and you were seeing a lot of power arms. Not exactly sure how the eligibility and all that stuff worked, but there was definitely talent. But I'm sure you kind of wish that the timing worked out a little better, so you could have had Lane Kiffin on your side in the recruiting efforts at FAU.
It would have been really nice to get to know Lane. He's an interesting guy. He's certainly an interesting guy on Twitter, and I would have loved to have had some conversations with him during the time I was down there. Unfortunately, our paths didn't cross. We were a few years off.
Yeah, probably for the best, though. So you returned back to ECU after your time at FAU, and so more of a true assistant coach paid role. How different was your experience at ECU the second time around as a coach?
It was different. Things had changed some. The one constant was Billy Godwin, and my relationship with him Billy and I had grown into great friends at that point. Not only was he a mentor and the guy that I worked for as a volunteer and was going back to work for, but he had become just a tremendous friend. And so that was really great to be able to come back and spend a couple of more years with him. But yeah, it was different. You know, it was much more responsibility than I had as a volunteer, certainly, but a lot more responsibility than I had even at FAU, because you don't realize until you get that recruiting coordinator title, you don't realize how much paperwork and how much things come across your desk that you have to take care of that kind of take you away from coaching your 19 or 20 hitters and going out and seeing kids play and recruiting those kids. So that was a big adjustment when I went back, was just, handling all the paperwork and handling the coordination, responsibilities. And so it took some time to get used to that. But it was a good experience. It came to an end, quicker than we would have wanted it to, but we did the best we could. It was, I met my wife during those 2 years at coming back to ECU. So it was meant for me to be back there. That's for sure.
That's an icing on the cake right there, right? Being able to meet your wife, and then, obviously coach back at the school that had taught you so much. But after ECU, you moved on to being a scout with the Seattle Mariners, correct?
That's right.
Talk a little bit about, that role. Obviously, I'm partial to the Seattle Mariners organization, having worked with a lot of the same people and crossing paths with a lot of the same people that you did in your time with Seattle. But talk about that transition and what it was like to get into pro scouting.
I really enjoyed scouting. It was probably, and I tell people this all the time, it was probably the most fun that I've had in the game of baseball, including as a player. And that's saying a lot, because I had some great experiences as a player and I've had great experiences as a coach, but it was the most fun I've had in the game. It's just such a cool lifestyle. You drive around and you watch baseball and you watch really good players. You're not having to kind of scour through to find guys. You've got a set list of really good players that you're going to evaluate. And I was in such a good position with the Mariners that Howard McCullough, who's a Hall of Fame scout, and he was right here in my backyard. I got to watch games with Howard and evaluate players with Howard. And the first game we were at together, it was University of North Carolina versus Kentucky, and Evan White was, who ended up being our first rounder that year. We were watching infield, outfield, and Evan White was playing first base. And Howard said, after 2 ground balls, Howard said, that guy's an 80 defender. And he was. College, like he's one of the best defenders you will ever see at first base. It's like watching a magician over there. And, Howard, he caught it in a second. And so being able to see that level of evaluation and that level of scouting, I sat with Tom Allison, who's a legendary scout in the Mariners organization. I sat with him for a few games. Scott Hunter. It was just really cool to see the evaluation process that those guys go through and how they see players. And the players, and I had a great area that year too. It was Mackenzie Gore. I got to watch Mackenzie Gore pitch 6 or 7 times. It's that's hands down the best amateur prospect I've ever seen. I got to watch Austin Beck. The college crop that year was really good. So I've got nothing but great things to say about the experience. And it's a very, very challenging life. When you talk about what these area guys do and how much they're required to be away from home, these guys are the unsung heroes of all of Major League Baseball. They're very, very much to be respected.
Absolutely. And you talk about Howard McCullough, and you know how I feel about him, but you say Hall of Fame scout, but he's, a Hall of Fame human being at the end of the day. And I'm still in touch with him to this day, as I'm sure you are as well, because he still comes out and obviously is still in the scouting game. And I met with him this fall when you guys played South Carolina and sat with him, and just watching him go through his evaluation process of players and the eye that he has for those players is remarkable. And being able to pick his brain on what he likes and what he sees. Obviously, he didn't miss out on Evan White. I had the pleasure of coaching him last year in Little Rock, Arkansas. And man, again, you talk about an 80 grade fielder, but is an 80 grade human as well. But I'm curious because obviously everybody said Evan White from the time that I got to Seattle, hey, you're going to want to get to know this kid because he's something special. One of the biggest things that the biggest knock on him was his hit tool, right? He was a guy that, lengthy guy, strong athlete, super, super talented, but lived on the ground a lot and was a little bit more choppy. And it's crazy because his power has come out more with age, and his swing has slowly evolved with age. So I'm curious about what you thought in terms of his hit tool and how that would play out, through his time in the organization.
I knew he had some barrel feel. It looked like from watching him in BP and watching him some in the games, he got hurt early in that series, so I wasn't able to watch him throughout the entire weekend. He hurt his groin. But yeah, it was a flat, path. It was in the zone a long time. But you could see with the frame and just the pure athleticism, a guy that's that good of an athlete, as he gets older, as he gains strength, as he gains a quote unquote man strength, then he's good. The power's going to come. And it looked like it was a pretty efficient swing and a pretty efficient path that was going to lend itself to being a little bit more, add more strength as he went along.
Yeah, and hats off to the coaches that he had at the University of Kentucky, and then even early on in the minor leagues, not tweaking him so much where a huge swing change might have affected him. They kind of let him play out, and I think a lot of times in the game today, you have, and I know I can be guilty of it too, but you have swing gurus and coaches that immediately pick apart what they think they're doing wrong, and they don't allow patience and some time to really evolve and let that player evolve through their experiences. So hats off to the organization, and hats off to University of Kentucky for kind of letting that play out, because he's something special. And honestly, it kind of stinks that we've had this Corona stuff go on, because it would have been really, really interesting to watch his career this year in Seattle. No doubt he would have been probably in the top 5 in terms of winning a Gold Glove at first base. But I think offensively, he might have surprised some people as well.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see his career unfold and develop. I know they've got tremendous expectations for him, and I think he's the type of talent that's going to be able to meet those expectations. And you mentioned it is not doing too much with a guy's swing or with a kid's swing, and that that's what we believe in at State. That's what we believed in at East Carolina. I learned that early on in my career from Link Jarrett, who's one of the best hitting coaches in the country. I worked with him at ECU, and when I was a volunteer, he went on to Auburn and UNCG. He's at Notre Dame now, and that was his thing. Is then you have to see him play. You have to give him a few weeks in the fall. You have to give him 3 to 4 weeks, see him play before you make any adjustments. And I think that's something that Coach Hart does with our hitters now, and Coach Holcomb. I think they live by that same mantra that you just take your time with any changes. You don't have to jump in the deep end right away. They'll kind of tell you what adjustments need to be made in their swing as you see them face live pitching and as you see them play live.
No, absolutely. And I definitely have a ton of questions being a hitting guy in terms of Link Jarrett. He's been regarded as one of the best college baseball hitting coaches in the country for a long time. I know his time at UNCG, his offense was always a perennial powerhouse in terms of offensive numbers. But you transitioned out of being a scout with Seattle into your new role or current role with NC State. So take us into the decision to get out of scouting and jump on board with, I guess it would be a crosstown rival. And now you're wearing the red and white and not wearing the purple and gold anymore. So take us through that transition.
Yeah, and look, I'm so happy to be a member of the pack and to be wearing the red and white, and proud of my past as at East Carolina, but so excited about the future at NC State, and so excited about where I'm at, the program that I'm in, and the people that I'm working with. But yeah, it was, Coach Hart had asked me about this position while I was scouting, and I didn't know if I wanted to get out of scouting. I'd just kind of gotten in, but this job was an opportunity to be in the game and do the things I enjoy doing, but at the same time, be home a little bit more, because there's not quite as much off-campus recruiting. There's not as much recruiting responsibility and things that take you away for long amounts of time. So I wanted to look into it. And when I sat down with Coach Hart and with Coach Avent to discuss the position, basically they gave me the freedom and the independence to just take the position and run with it and gear it towards my strengths and, all the things that I enjoy and I do well. And it was hard to turn that down when after I had that meeting with those two guys. And I've known Chris for a really long time and have nothing but tremendous amounts of respect for him and what he's accomplished. And Coach Avent as well. So yeah, it was a no-brainer after I talked to them, regardless of how much I enjoyed scouting.
Yeah, I think you could tell that evaluating is a huge passion of yours, and I love our when we hold tryouts, except for having to cut kids, but I really enjoy evaluating players as well. I would consider myself a very optimistic evaluator. I always try to see well, you know what, like he's got some feel for that changeup. If we could figure out how to add a little bit here and there, and looking at the different jobs that you had, you went from varying, I guess. Talent levels or I guess statuses of the program at the time. Going from ECU to Seattle, there might be some guys that you would have loved to recruit, but that aren't necessarily in the right bracket for you got to present to your people, the higher ups in Seattle, and then you moved on to NC State. So evaluating the different kind of, I guess, skill levels required for whoever you were working for, do you think like your time with Seattle helped you evaluate and find some better recruits for NC State, who tends to get some pretty heavy hitters coming in each recruiting class?
Yeah, absolutely. I learned so much about the evaluation process from my time with the Mariners, and just being able to break a prospect down into so many different facets and to evaluate each of those facets equally, to take all the data and the technology and to apply it to the evaluation process and break down each part of a player. But yeah, I feel like that my time with the Mariners has certainly helped, some of the things that I'll do in the future and some of the things that I've been able to help with at NC State.
Yeah. So talk about early days stepping into that role. What were some of the biggest initiatives that you wanted to bring to the program? Obviously, with your title, Director of Player Development, it probably encompasses a lot. You're probably, not only trying to get them better on the field, but you're trying to, hold them accountable and get them better in the classroom as well, and improve their team GPA and just from an accountability standpoint, because that bleeds into the game as well. But I'm curious about the initiatives and kind of first goals that you had stepping into your role.
I think the primary reason why my position exists is to make Coach Hart's job easier and to make Clint Chrysler's job easier. I try to take as many things as I can from an NCAA rules standpoint and a compliance standpoint off of their desks, so they're able to do what they're good at, which is to coach our players and to go out and evaluate kids and to recruit them. That's why I exist, and that's what I wanted to do, is to try to make. And it was Coach Foxhall, Scott Foxhall, who was now at Mississippi State. It was him at the time when I first started, but I want to help these guys and make their jobs as easy as possible, so they're free to do what they're good at. So I think there was an organizational aspect of it. There was a research and a relationship aspect of it that I wanted to attack. And then, for the season, I felt like, the scouting reports, being able to help with that and watch the video on synergy and prepare for opponents and help those guys out with that side of things. Those were the things that initially I wanted to attack heading in.
Yeah, I remember talking to you last year about synergy and how excited you were and how a handful of programs were really diving in with it. But I am curious, being a kind of newer title in college baseball, and also, I mean, the word that all college coaches kind of hope for is freedom. You have the freedom to kind of take your job kind of where you want it to go to help the program more each year. How has your job in terms of time spent or roles and responsibilities changed since you took it in 2017?
It's very similar to when we first started out. I think the idea of what Coach Hart and what Coach Avent wanted to do with the position, they had it for a while. They had the title for a while, but I think they wanted to transition into more of a baseball specific type position. And I think that's what I did. I understood that walking in the door, and I was able to take on some responsibilities that I think fit into what they expected out of the role. And it's there haven't been a whole lot of changes in a short amount of time. It's only been 2 years and some change. So I think that as everything happens with baseball, it will constantly evolve. It's always evolved, and it will evolve more going forward. So I expect that, but there haven't been a whole lot of big changes up to this point.
Yeah, absolutely. So to dive back into the hitting side, obviously Link Jarrett, we talked about briefly, Coach Hart at NC State currently. I mean, hell, with the way the season was rolling this year, you guys were off to a hot start. I think you were top 5 in the country in home runs and probably, in the top, 10 to 15 at the very least in terms of offensive production. You guys had a heck of a squad led by obviously Patrick Bailey. But what makes or what made Link Jarrett such a successful coach, and how has that bled into what you see with Coach Hart at NC State, with Holcomb coming over and probably implementing a little bit of Link Jarrett's process as well? But what makes their offenses so successful?
Well, we've got, our staff is the Link Jarrett, his influence on our staff is very, very evident. Joey Holcomb, who came on board this year as our volunteer assistant, has taken a big role with our hitters. He was with Link for 7 years at UNCG. So, and I was with Link for 2 years at East Carolina and have, had multiple conversations with him throughout the years. Coach Hart has been friends with Link for years. Link actually coached him at Florida State, I think back in 2003. So the influence is certainly evident. And, I think it's attention to detail. I think what Coach Jarrett teaches is attention to detail, but it's not so much a mechanical attention to detail. We make mechanical adjustments, but I think they're more minor mechanical adjustments. And we don't have an overwhelming, overriding philosophy on the mechanics of the swing. We take each guy's individual swing and we try to make it the best we can within that kid's set of skills. And that's something we all learn from Link. And don't get too caught up in changing guys and breaking guys down from a mechanical standpoint. But we do talk a lot about approaches. We talk about being ready for the fastball. We talk about being able to adjust to off speed versus sitting on off speed. We talk about what is a good pitch to hit. We're constantly on our guys about staying in the strike zone, understanding the strike zone, controlling the strike zone, Kyle, as you know very, very well from your time with the Mariners. But it is all filtered in. All his ideas have filtered in. And I think the offensive group that you saw this year was very much a direct result of Coach Holcomb coming over and Coach Jarrett's philosophies.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, a lot of our players, from the professional standpoint, and then even into the college game, to be honest, the professional game and the college game are completely different. Strike zones are completely different. The ability to control the zone at the college level may not necessarily, in terms of controlling the zone at the professional level, correlate. But obviously, the ability to swing at good pitches and take bad pitches is your key to success. But in terms of all the information that's out there these days, how do you really command, or how do they really command their hitters to stay on task for what they're trying to achieve, and I guess ignore the noise outside of all the things that we can access in this information age, and certainly the players are accessing? How do they do such a good job of controlling that message and keeping all of the outside noise away from their players, and really buying into the approach that you guys instill at NC State?
I think every part of our hitters' development, whether it be their swings in the cage, whether it be their swings in BP, their approaches in our inner squads and their approaches, they're always in a mindset. They're always in an approach that's based off of their skills, what they want to accomplish in that at bat, and what the pitcher, what the guy on the mound is going to give them to work with. And we force that mindset every day in all aspects of their swings. There's never a swing that's taken without some sort of mindset and some sort of approach, in their mind. So, yeah, I mean, I think that, it's just that, that attention to detail and forcing those guys to stay within a mindset and within an approach. And all the other stuff that's out there, all the noise, the technology, it's all good stuff. We're certainly not opposed to blast. We're not opposed to K-Bet. We've had those those reps come in and demo those products, and we've had our guys experiment with them. It's just not something that at this point, as a staff, that we're necessarily ready to dive into before we have a full understanding of it. Because as a staff, you have to be a champion of those products for your players to really get a lot out of them in terms of their player development. And we just haven't gotten to that point yet, but we're working to get there. We're exploring, and we have those guys out every fall, and we have those conversations, and those products are certainly, I think, that a lot of the future of offensive development.
Yeah, and they're very good. And you and I have had multiple conversations about that. But I think at the end of the day, especially with a lot of the new age, so many people lose sight of what they're rooted in, and there's so many good college baseball, professional baseball coaches that are still able to deliver a clear and concise plan, message, program with their hitters without the technology. So the ones that say that you need technology to really develop your hitters, I think are crazy, because at the end of the day, you're right. The ability to become an expert in that technology is huge, because there's so many hitting coaches and, managers and gurus and all that stuff that, obviously are going to promote all the things that they did well for certain players. But we also lose sight of, those guys have ruined a lot of players as well. And the technology is not for everybody. I do think it has a place and can be an extra added tool to help develop hitters and pitchers and players for sure. So it's really cool to see, and I think anyone that thinks that if you do not have technology, then you are not going to be successful, and that's just wrong. But I do think you're right. We can use those technologies to help develop our hitters and our players. But the messaging has to be perfect, has to be right. And the communication at the end of the day is really the most important thing.
No question. Absolutely. Communication is certainly the key.
Yeah. And I'm curious about this, Ben. Last year, the draft, you guys lost some key players. So one thing, we all knew Will Wilson was going to be a tough loss, but I knew about Torres coming up. He was very highly touted out of high school. The last few years, these NC State teams have been so much fun to watch. And to me, it comes down to athleticism. And even this year, more so than any other year, the aggression on the bases, it's just – they're just running people out of the game in the second inning, and it's really fun to watch. But stability at the catcher position, it seems like we've had nothing but stud shortstops for the last decade. Athletes, 3 center fielders in the outfield, you could just mix them around however you want. But then the biggest loss in my eyes last year that I thought would be really hard to replace would be Evan Edwards. Something you take for granted is a super athletic first baseman, slick fielding, high baseball IQ, obviously a plus bat. I think Austin Murr was a huge addition. Was that a big point of emphasis for you guys after seeing the impact that Edwards had the last few years to bring in that guy who just is a rock in the infield, table setter offensively? And do you guys tend to lean towards left-handed first baseman?
Yeah, I think, I don't know what if we have a steadfast philosophy on lefties, at first base. But I think anytime you can get a left-handed hitter at a corner position that's not necessarily a premium defensive position, that's a plus, because you can't be too picky with what side they hit from at shortstop, second base, center field, and behind the plate. So you don't want to become too right-handed. You don't want to become too left-handed. So I think anytime you can put a left-handed bat on a corner outfielder at first base, I think that's a plus. But yeah, give Coach Chrysler the credit on Austin Murr. He went out and saw, Austin play in the fall. He saw him a couple of times. He was very convicted on what he saw. He's very convicted on the conversation that he had with his coaches and said, this can be the guy that comes in and replaces Evan Edwards. And those are, like you said, those are some really, really big shoes to fill. Evan put together 2 of the best years at NC State as anybody has ever done. And he was a tremendous person and citizen of our program. He was a tremendous defender. He was a tremendous leader in a quiet way. But Coach Chrysler was convicted on Austin Murr. And, Austin, when he first came to NC State, we weren't quite sure if we were going to see what we ended up seeing. But his makeup, if you spend one day with Austin Murr, you realize why he got to where he was to where he is now. His makeup is through the roof. He's incredibly bright. He's incredibly conscientious. He's very coachable. He's a hard worker, and he's got a ton of ability. He's a different type player than Evan. Austin's game is built a little bit more around athleticism and speed than what Evans was. Evans was built a little bit more around brute power, but a lot of them, both guys have so many things that help you win baseball games. And we're very fortunate to have replaced a guy of Evan Edwards' caliber with a guy of Austin Murr's caliber. And I hope that we get a chance to see him again.
No doubt. And I think the thing, from a pitcher's perspective, they both would present nightmares to me because they just look so comfortable in the box. Lefties, always tough for a righty pitcher, but really quiet actions. They control the strike zone like you talked about, and they're going to do damage on a mistake, but they're not going to – they'll gladly go 0-1 if you make a quality pitch and it's nothing they could do damage with. But really enjoy watching both of them play.
Yeah, so diving into kind of what Danny said in terms of being okay with taking that strike and looking for a pitch to do damage with. I want to dive into, obviously, hitting is what I do right now with Tampa Bay, and it's what I'm passionate about, but it's not the only thing I'm passionate about. So in terms of, you mentioned synergy and developing and taking certain things off of Holcomb's plate and Hart's plate in terms of developing scouting reports and using synergy as a platform to help develop those reports. But how in detail would you say scouting reports are? And what are your thoughts on, the simplicity of it, and kind of creating a whole team approach with, using synergy and developing the approaches for your players, come game time?
Well, synergy has changed the game probably more so at the college level than anything that I've experienced, since 2007 and being in coaching. I knew when we brought it on board that the first time I watched this system, I told Chris Hart that this is going to completely change the game. It changes not only how you prepare for an opposing pitcher, but it changes, what you do with your defensive alignments. You have a much higher level of comfort to use your shifts, to move guys around in the infield based off where a kid's going, where the opposition is going to be hitting, because you've seen it. You've seen it on film that this guy hits. This is where he hits the baseball. So why not put a defender there? So it has completely changed and revolutionized the way that we prepare for a weekend and a midweek opponent. And you don't watch any less film with synergy. You're still in there at 6:30 in the morning and you're watching until practice starts at 1:00, but you're getting so much more information in that amount of time than you did back when I was at Florida Atlantic or even East Carolina, because you're basically taking a 4-hour game broadcast or a 4.5-hour game broadcast and you're condensing it into 20 minutes. So instead of watching 2 starts from an opposing pitcher that you're going to be facing on Friday night, you might be watching 6 starts. So you know all the more about the shape of his breaking ball, whether or not he commands his breaking ball, the movement, the run on his fastball. Does he throw same side changeups? All those questions that your hitters might have going into a series, you're able to have a better feel and a better understanding on how to answer those questions. And we don't get too technical with our guys. We have a very brief meeting before a weekend series and before a midweek game that Coach Holcomb and Coach Hart talk to our guys about. Hey, this is what you're going to see, and it takes about 5 or 10 minutes. And our scouting reports that we post are not incredibly detail oriented. We just want the guys to know the basics and not to get overwhelmed and totally be dependent on those things in the box. But we as a staff want to know those things and be detail oriented about our reports, because it helps Coach Avent manage the game. It helps him know what moves he wants to make before it's even time to make that move from an offensive standpoint and from a pitching, staff management standpoint. So that's the way it's changed things. It's a beautiful system, man. And when you start getting into some of the filters and you can really break things down, you can sit and watch that and prepare for an opponent for 7 hours a day, man. You get there at 6, and before you know it's 2:00, you don't even know what you've been there. It's such a great system.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We've had obviously multiple systems at the pro level, and you can start diving into all the TrackMan data, and you can dive into the splits in terms of counts and where this guy gets chased, where this guy gets hit well, and really sometimes I think as offensive coaches we can move away from just understanding what that player does well, and I think it's important as coaches to really understand the complexity of certain situations, understand all of the, I call it deep information, but the ability to simplify that to our players is so crucial. And that has to be why a lot of your hitters has had so much success. If you dive into this player has so much ride and this guy's a north-south guy and this guy, has some sink and his velocity's here. And sometimes, or he's, 3-2, he throws this pitch, 0-2, he throws that pitch. And, it can be a lot for especially a college baseball player to kind of consume, and it can definitely lock him up in the box. So I like that approach of we try to keep it as simple as possible. Meetings are short. We all know that players don't like a ton of meetings, and it really stresses them out. And at the end of the day, it's about them trying to get to that flow state in the box. And if they're consumed by so much information, man, it becomes information overload, and it doesn't allow them to have as much success. So I think that is really one of the reasons why you guys have been so successful, powerful. And as a team, you guys offensively have absolutely dominated. But I'll let Danny switch it over. I'll move away from the hitting questions. I'll let Danny dive into some of the pitching stuff that I know nothing about.
Well, even before that, so you talk about the shifts and stuff like that. So one thing that I think has made NC State's teams last few years so successful has been the versatility. When you see Devontae Brown playing, starting in right, then shifting to left field, then playing third for a couple innings, he might even move over to second. That's amazing versatility, and it just allows you guys to put the best hitter at the plate in the perfect situation for each guy. But defensively, I imagine with all the information and the shifting that you guys are implementing, it's got to be tough for a guy like Devontae Brown or even a Vasquez. Some of these guys that play multiple infield or outfield and infield positions. Have you noticed some guys struggling with knowing where they're supposed to be? I know that guys have the cards in the outfield, but knowing if a shift is on for this guy, or is that more so on the shortstop or the catcher to make sure guys are moving around where they need to be?
No, there's been really no struggle with it because Coach Hart does such a great job of not only coaching it but communicating it during the games. Those guys know where their shift positions are long before Coach Hart tells them to go there in a game based off of a hitter. So it's been very clearly coached, very clearly communicated to them prior to the series, and I think all those guys feel comfortable with where their spots are and their anchor spots are on the field. Even the guys that aren't full-time infielders like a Devontae Brown, we go as far as even in some of the ground ball work is, hey, go over into an anchor pull position or an anchor shift position, and they know exactly where that spot is on the field. And if we're preparing, if we're having a Thursday night practice on the road in Charlottesville before the Virginia series, they find their spots on that field as well. So it's all a credit to Coach Hart and what a tremendous coach he is and what a great job he does in developing, helping these guys understand what we do want to do from a coaching standpoint.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of, I guess, not to be cheesy, but synergy between the coaching staff. And Coach Chrysler has done a great job with the pitching staff, filling Coach Foxhall's shoes. It's funny, as pitchers, we want everything. The shifts are great, but then when that weakly hit ground ball squeaks through the other way, damn these shifts, I hate them. Have you gotten any pushback from players, or has Coach Chrysler heard complaints from guys about some situations like that where a weak contact turns into a hit based off those shifts?
We haven't, not at NC State. I've been in programs in the past where some of the players will react to some of that stuff, especially before it came really popular at the major league level. A lot of what's popular at the major league level, our guys at the college level will accept a lot easier. I think back 10 years ago, they weren't shifted as much. So when we tried to do some things, moving guys around, guys would get a little bit more upset when balls kind of snuck through those holes. But Clint, Coach Chrysler has embraced it. You will never, ever hear him complain about a guy being in a shifted pull position and a ball sneaking through where otherwise that defender would have been if we wouldn't have shifted. He's just not that type of personality. He knows, the impact that it has on the game, the positive impact that it has on the game, and sometimes it's just not going to go our way. And our players understand that as well. And you guys know Coach A that, if those guys aren't going to, he's going to take care of it, if we start getting some pushback, and we're going to help them understand, why we're doing it. What we've seen in the preparation process and why we've got guys playing in certain spots. But, you understand, if you're on the mound and you give up a weak hit ground ball that sneaks to a place that a defender would have been if we wouldn't have shifted, I can understand the frustration, but they know how hard we work. The players know how hard we work to prepare and how much time goes into it, how much thought goes into it. And I think that they understand that, and that, hey, if a ball, it just wasn't meant to be that play.
Yeah, and I think that just goes into trust, and we talk about that a lot, getting your players to trust what's going on, getting the players to understand how much time and effort and energy you put into developing those reports are huge. But you did touch on it, man, like giving the players the why behind the what. If you can present them the information and this is why we're doing it, they're going to be more susceptible to actually implementing that and okay with it not working all the time, because there is no clear, concise, it's going to be perfect every single time. So explaining the why behind the what is always crucial, in my opinion. A lot of times I think as coaches, we don't deliver as much information. We try to dictate so many things, and it's my way or the highway. And we got that ego, pump our chest out. We got that ego struck with our players. So I think, what I took out of that is just being able to explain to the players the why behind the what is so crucial.
Yes, absolutely. Just having them understand what we're thinking, why we're thinking it, and this is what we're going to do because of that. That's crucial in the relationship. And look, we've got good players. We understand that. We've got bright players. Patrick Bailey and Will Wilson. Those guys are incredibly smart guys, and so they understand where it's coming from. So they know the why.
Yeah, I think from the pitching side, I think it has been cool to see progress the last couple of years with NC State in terms of guys just being put in situations to succeed. I felt like I was I was in a little bit over my head. I got the Sunday job my freshman year, and I basically flashed in bullpens or inter squads a very serviceable midweek or weekend starter repertoire, but I didn't have the command of it like it was needed to fill that spot. So I'm just curious. I'm a little bit sensitive to it because a guy like Matt Willitson, who I've worked with a little bit in the past, he gets thrown into the weekend job, and it's a really, really tough spot to fill. Then you have Sam Highfill, who comes into a relief spot, and it's just, hey, go get a few outs. And he thrived in that situation. So when you're recruiting guys, obviously talent is always going to play, but are you guys looking at the arms you're getting as, that's a 6th, 7th inning guy. That's a back end of the bullpen arm. That's a midweek starter. I mean, David Harrison has taken huge strides the last couple of years after a tough freshman campaign, and I felt for him because I was in those shoes. So are you guys looking at potential roles when you're recruiting guys, or you just want as much filthy stuff as you can on campus?
I think you try to get the best guys you can. I think it's certainly from a high school standpoint, you just try to get the most talented guys that you can and let them determine or let them tell us what they are once they get to campus and once we start inter-squadding and playing. Eventually, they will show who they are, whether it's a starter or a reliever, and we just have to give them the chance and the time to do that. I think what you look for in a high school pitcher is just the ability to command the fastball. They have to command the fastball. That's the bottom line in terms of success at our level. And then you look at being able to command the fastball to both sides and then being able to command at least one above average off-speed pitch. And if they can do those things, which both Matt and Sam can, then they've got a chance. And then they get to us and we'll let them kind of determine where they're going to best fit in terms of game management and their role on the staff. Now, junior college guys, when you're evaluating those guys, they're a little bit further along in their development, and you may be recruiting for a specific need on your staff, like a left-handed breaking ball guy that can come in and get a lefty out in the 7th inning, or a right-handed sidearm guy that's got a good sweeping slider that can come in and get a righty out in a big spot in the 8th. You might do a little bit more of that, role-specific recruiting at the junior college level, but not so much in high school.
Seems like you guys like 6'7" lefties, 6'10" righties too. I guess every step. It's funny when I was down the first base line watching you guys play. I think Tennessee Tech. It just Dalton Feeney rolls down to the bullpen. Yeah, I don't know. He's got to be 6'4", 6'5", big old country strong. And then I see what's the kid's name? The 6'10" guy. And then I see Kleiman roll down. I was like, good Lord. I'm glad that I played when I did because I don't know if I fit in this bullpen at this time. It's just you guys have some hosses for sure.
Yeah, you're thinking about Austin Pace,
yes.
from Mountain Curry Talk. Yeah, Austin was off to a really good start and had some real big momentum before we had to break apart. But look, give Coach Hart the credit, and Coach Avent deserves so much credit for the program that he's built and maintained for such a long amount of time. But Chris Hart. He's not a self-promoter. He's not banging his chest on Twitter. He's not out, spouting the gospel about it. But this guy is one of the best evaluators and one of the best recruiters in the country, hands down. And he's done it he showed loyalty to NC State. He showed loyalty to Coach Avent. And he's the best. Those guys, we have those guys trotting down out of the bullpen, and we have these hitters that are so efficient. And so, the Patrick Baileys and Will Wilsons, because Coach Hart is such a tremendous evaluator and such a tremendous recruiter. And he deserves a lot more credit than I think that he asked for and that he gets across the country, because he's the best.
Yeah, he's super humble too. Like you said, he's not going to broadcast, the work that he's done. And I know if you were to ask Coach Avent, what Coach Hart has meant to the NC State program, I'm sure he could probably, well, one, he talks a lot anyways, right? But he could probably talk for hours on, the value that Chris Hart has brought to NC State and the relationships that he's created in the community and how well he's been developing players through, the 3 to 4 years that he gets them. But let's shift and talk about Coach Avent real quick. I certainly love the man to death. Definitely we had our call it disagreements as player coach, but it was always out of respect. And I always felt like I handled it, at least to my view, in the best way possible. But I mean, the man's been a legend, and he's the winningest coach in NC State history. He's been there for, I probably imagine over 20, 25 years. What has made Coach Avent so successful? And I know you've only been there for 3 years, but I'm sure you've, obviously been able to pick apart or sit back and reflect on what has made Coach Avent and the program at NC State, a perennial powerhouse and such a successful program in the last, especially 10 to 15 years.
It's how much he cares. It's so evident right from the first time, the first day that I worked with him and worked for him, is how much he cares about everyone. And, you hear different things out in the baseball community about everyone, about all of us. But, when you work with Coach Avent, he's such a great person. He's such a great human being, and he cares so much about our players. He wants to make their lives at NC State as good and as easy as they possibly can be in their time here. And you see that. You see guys like Evan Edwards coming back for their senior year, Brock Deathridge and Josh McClain and Brad Debo. These guys want to come back and be there for their senior year when they have professional opportunities, because of the environment that Coach Avent has cultivated, and because he embraces those guys so much and has such a big heart. And they know he cares. He may get on. All of our dads got on us at one point. Mm-hmm. They know that he, like, just like our dads were hard on us, our players know that he may be hard on them at times, but they know how much he loves them and how much he cares. And, he doesn't have kids of his own. So these guys are like his children. They're like his kids. At a risk of sounding a little bit sappy, but he treats them like that. He's tough on them when he needs to be, and he gives them a hug and a pat on the back when they need that. So he's been such a, I'll tell you a story. My wife and I, when our first year at NC State, we were having a really, we moved into a new home, and we were having an issue with our refrigerator. We'd been through 2 refrigerators, had to dump them out, all the frozen stuff. You guys know how expensive that is. And we were just at our wits' end with this refrigerator. Like, we'd spent, $2,500. This guy makes one phone call, and he has a new refrigerator in our home the next day that we've never had. He just got that, he's so thoughtful. He's got such a big heart. And I think that's what's, besides the obvious, a passion for baseball and a great mind for baseball, he just cares so much about his staff and about his players.
Yeah, and everybody has their own stories, and it's really cool because from personal experience, he sees the good in everything. You could bring up, hey, coach, you remember how bad this was? And he's like, he kind of like has an ability to forget about all the bad, and especially after players leave the program, he just gravitates towards the good that they've done. And I'll tell a quick story about Coach Avent, because I think it's important to know what you said, that the care factor and players and people can see right through that. But we had a former player, part of our program, that really left on bad terms. And, I won't get into the details, but ran into some legality issues after the fact, and definitely didn't treat Coach Avent the best way, with the utmost respect that he certainly deserved. And when this certain player ran into those legal issues, right away he was like, how can I help? And that just dives into, and that really made it, kind of sit home for me, like, wow, man, this guy is willing to care for, love on a player that really treated him with absolutely no respect whatsoever. And quite frankly, excuse my language, was an asshole towards him. But he was able to put that behind him and offer assistance and guidance and wanted to care for his players. And that just goes down to, how much he cares about the university and how much he cares about the program. But I mean, he's been rooted in it for 25 years plus. And, obviously goes back to the days when, he was around Jim Valvano and got to experience a lot of those things. And it's really interesting to hear him talk about that. But I think the care factor is huge, and you certainly hit on it. And I'm really appreciative that I've had the time and still have the time to communicate with him. And, he's a legend for sure.
Oh, there's no question. He's absolutely a legend in college baseball. And, people around this area will always remember the impact that he's had on the program. He's such a great guy to work for. And the story that you told, the story that I told, there every day there's a story with Coach Avent. You don't hear about him. He's not broadcasting them, through the media or on Twitter. But there's a story like that every day that he wakes up. He lives his life to make other people's lives easier. And he's very good at it. And it's just been a true honor and a pleasure to work with him for almost 3 years now. And he just makes you feel at home right away. Just got that personality.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. And if you want to learn about NC State athletics, you go grab dinner with Coach Avent at Emilio's, and he'll go through all the pictures on the walls and tell you the date that game happened and a funny story about each guy. But for me and my family were sold because I was supposed to go to the University of Florida, but I needed my second elbow surgery, got a medical release. So I was kind of like you. I'm in June, and I start after my senior year of high school, and I start school in a couple months without somewhere to go. I went up on my official visit in a sling after my second surgery. Coach Avent didn't treat me any different, and we went to watch Aaron Bates play, whose father had passed away, I believe, not too long before that. And just seeing him hug Bates and just seeing how much he cared, like he was still on the team, I was sold. And my family, same thing. It was just because I had been in the circuit on visits at FSU and UF, Miami, and all these other programs, and they're phenomenal programs, and I guarantee their coaches care as well. But my parents just had this feeling. They were like, I think that this guy has your best interests at heart. I really think that this is somewhere we trust sending you to grow into a better person more so than player. And like Kyle said, all the bombs I gave up and jams I didn't get out of seem like they're forgotten. And he just always will praise work ethic or the impact I had in the locker room, little things like that I took pride in, but at the same time, you don't know if they're recognized. But Coach Avent always did have his players' best interests at heart, and there's really no way to describe him because he's a one of a kind guy. But I think those guys that came back for their senior year, I don't know how much they'd regret that because I can't imagine there's another guy in any pro ball organization that's going to provide the entertainment factor that Coach Avent will on a daily basis.
He's absolutely one of a kind, no doubt.
The last question I have, and I'll let you take it away and offer any advice to our listeners, but you've obviously, started at the grassroots where you're making hardly any money in the volunteer position, and you've experienced so many different things through baseball. But what would be some advice you'd give coaches that are looking to start off in the baseball career, be it high school, be it college, be it professional? What are some advices through your experiences that you've had that you would give to those coaches?
Surround yourself with good people. Surround yourself, work with, do your homework on the people that you're going to be working with and the people that you're going to be working for. Take your time and talk to people that have worked for them, that have had good experiences, that have worked for them, that may have not had positive experiences, and know what you're getting yourself into because, your work environment is going to determine your happiness. And when you're first starting out, don't get so caught up in the money. Don't get so caught up in the money. Just put yourself in a good position to have success and be around good people that are going to be able to help promote you and advance your career. And don't get so caught up in the financial side of things. That will come. I've known a lot of guys that had to struggle and had to grind from a financial standpoint for 4 or 5 years and are making a lot of money, right now. So just put yourself in a good position where you're going to have success and in a program where you're going to have success.
Absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate your time, man. This has been awesome. Obviously, diving into the relationships that you've had and the experiences you've had is awesome to hear and get that perspective. Something that you and I have not talked about in the past. So it's really cool to hear all the good things that you guys are doing at NC State. More on a personal note, all the good things that you're bringing to the program, and we certainly wish you guys nothing but success in the future. For yourself personally, nothing but success in the future. I know, especially with the people I've been around, you've been around, that everyone speaks super highly of you, and it's cool to see your career play off the way it has. But I'll let you take the mic, and if you have any other advice or any things you'd like to say, now is, I guess, your time.
Okay, thanks, guys. Look, I really appreciate the time. I enjoyed talking with you guys, and thank you so much for what you're doing with the podcast and putting this out into the community and trying to help young coaches and help young players advance their careers and develop their skills. So thank you guys for that. But I've enjoyed our time, and until the next time, hopefully we can do it again. But go Pack, and you guys take care.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Controlling the Zone. If you enjoyed this episode, please share on social media to spread the word throughout the coaching community. Remember, we are all in this together with one goal of getting our players better. Also, please be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform to stay up to date on future episodes being released every Monday morning. Thanks again, and have a great week.